In today's video, we're going to talk about Chechen, also known as Caribbean rosewood and black poisonwood. Don't worry, the wood itself in this form is safe. The sap itself can be poisonous, harmful to humans. Now, this is going to be part of an ongoing series where I do some discussion on some woods I've had the chance to work with recently or in the past that I have pieces of, so I can give an idea of what it's like to work with power tools, hand tools, so that you know before you buy what you're getting into. Now, Chechen is an exotic hardwood, or at least exotic for those of us in the United States. It comes from northern South America, Belize, some of the island nations like Cuba, Mexico as well. Chechen has a Janka hardness of about 2400, so it's pretty far up there, though nowhere near the very top. White oak, for example, has a 1300, poplar with about a 550, 600. The pricing of Chechen is not too bad. The reason it's called Caribbean rosewood is that it's sometimes used as an alternative for rosewood. It's not a real rosewood, and the price reflects that. It's not cheap, but it's also in the moderate range for an imported hardwood. I think it's very approachable price-wise if you want to get into something that looks a little more exotic like rosewood, but don't really want to get into the real rosewoods yet. Now in these videos, I'm going to go over the tool and the task that I used, and I'm going to give a rating of 1 to 10. And 1 is going to be how things are with poplar. I consider poplar to be one of the best, most approachable beginner woods. It works so well. It has so few problems. And then 10 are going to be things way up the chart like desert ironwood, stuff like that. That's just a real frustrating wood to work with. So the lower the number, the easier. The higher number, the harder. So let's begin with the milling process. I do all my planing and jointing on a planer with a sled, so planing, I'll give it about a 7. It is pretty hard to plane if you don't have brand new-ish sharp blades, just sharp blades in general. I'd give it a 7 for both hand and power. You can definitely get some tear out. Now these pieces have some pretty wild grain. It comes often in straight grain as well, but I went all out for the really crazy looking grain. Some tear out, absolutely. If you're trying to finish this with a hand plane, it's got to be sharp. Now, next in the milling process is the ripping and cross-cutting. Ripping, I'd give this about a 6. Little burning, little bit of saw marks, minor tear out, though not too bad. Cross-cutting, surprisingly good, about a 4, I'd say. A little tear out, nothing different than maybe a maple, whereas poplar, though, does not tear out much at all. So I'd give it a 4. It leaves a nice, clean, smooth edge. Really good to work with overall on the table saw, as long as you get your feed rate right and you have a sharp blade. If you get it wrong, you're going to get some burning on the edge when you're ripping. Up next, we have the bandsaw, and I'd give this about a 6 on the bandsaw. And this is going to partly be determined by the power your bandsaw has and the blade size. I have a 3/4 horsepower benchtop bandsaw, and with a 1/4 inch 6-tooth blade, I was able to do pretty much most of the things I would normally do. I'd give it, like I said, a 6, 6.5 maybe. There's a little bit of tear out, and taking sharp corners is not as easy on something like a poplar. You're going to have to go a little slower and be a little more deliberate, perhaps some relief cuts. You can get a little bit of that blade bend if you try to make the turn too sharp, because it doesn't want to cut away as fast. It definitely gunks up the blade a little bit, but I'd give it a 6 overall. Not the easiest, but definitely doable on the bandsaw, even a benchtop bandsaw. Next up was the router. Surprisingly good on the router. I'd give it a 3. I had very minimal tear out on edge work, and plunge routing was super simple. It was, like I said, surprisingly smooth on the plunge routing, doing some mortises. Very happy with that. Routing can sometimes be a problem on really hard woods. It's that initial plunge can be difficult. Sharp blade, sharp router bit as always is going to help more, but very nice to use on the router, even with this wild grain. Chiseling was a bit of a mixed bag. I'm going to go a 6.5. Paring on the face, no problem. Chopping on the face, a little tough, but not really an issue. Paring on the long grain, not a problem. Paring on the end grain, quite difficult. I would give it one of those 7.5s. If your chisel isn't sharp, you're going to get some of that stuttering. One of the nice things about the edge and the face grain is that the density prevents you from accidentally going too deep. Sometimes on softwoods, you'll get that gouging and tearing out with it. It's really nice to pare, leaves a very smooth edge, Overall, pretty good, but not the easiest on the end grain, so be prepared for that. And it's not the style of difficulty of like a softwood, it's just the density itself makes it quite hard to get that cut started. Gluing, I'd give it a 2. No real problems. As with any exotic wood that's a little oily, a little silica content, wipe it down with mineral spirits first and you'll be okay. Wipe it with mineral spirits, quickly let it dry, then do your glue up immediately after and you'll be fine. I had no issues with that whatsoever. Now, sanding, I'd give it about a 6.5, maybe a 7. It's very dense and a little oily, so it goes through sandpaper. It tends to heat up the sandpaper. Heat is the enemy of sharpness. So be prepared to spend a little more time sanding if you're doing a large project especially, and work your way up through the grits. It's very hard if you're trying to skip a grit and you've left, say, 120 scratches and you're going to try to get them out with 220. It's going to take you a while. So go through the grits slowly, make your way there, and you'll have an easier time. Give that sandpaper a little bit of a check every once in a while to see whether it's gummed up. It will get quite hot. Overall finishing, no problem. I used an oil finish. I did some testing with lacquer and polyurethane. It looked fine. Application-wise on my project, I was fine with oil. It wasn't going to be a heavy use. It soaked up a moderate amount, nothing like a soft maple, soft curly maple that can just really soak it up, or a spalted maple. And it took more than like a super, super dense exotic wood that struggles to take in oil finishes sometime. Pretty pleased with that. You can use a variety of finishes and you'll be fine. Just wipe it down with mineral spirits ahead of time to always make sure you've got the minimal amount of the oil on the surface of the wood so things can penetrate or sit on better. I just want to do some close-up shots really quick. This has some mineral spirits on it so you can get a look closer to the finish. Very, very nice chatoyance. This is off the planer, but unfinished. You can see some scratch marks from moving it around there. Not really scratches, just more indent marks. This is the unfinished from the lumber yard itself. Obviously, they've got their planer marks. You can see the really nice chatoyance in there and the really wild grain. We've got some pale, kind of brownish. We've got some greens, blacks, little bits of red in there too. It's an incredible wood. To be honest, when you're looking at it, you just see more and more. I highly recommend working with this. If it's one of your first woods, I don't know. I'd step up into this. If you're comfortable working with something like white oak and you've got the tools to work easily with that, you'll be able to work with this just fine. Just make sure all of your cutter heads and everything are nice and sharp before you go, and you'll be totally fine.